Hello, everybody. This is Rich, and you are watching a live Hangout on Air that is a panel about tabletop RPGs. Excited to say that this is part of VirtuaCon, which is the best 3 days in virtual gaming. It is in October of 2014, and it's the second day of VirtuaCon. VirtuaCon has a number of panels, which hopefully you're watching live because you can ask some questions live. This panel is about what's in your RPG toolbox. Now, real quick on the top here, I'll let you know that VirtuaCon has a number of tabletop RPGs ongoing throughout pretty much the entire time slot, because we've got people, as you can see on this panel, who are across the globe. So if you're at all interested in playing some games, after hearing about awesome things that you can put in your toolbox, then head on over to RPG Geek, who are the hosts of VirtuaCon. There are a number of forum topics that you can use there. There's even a forum topic for games that are looking for players. You can jump in today or tomorrow and play. But let's get to the panel. So, what's in your RPG toolbox? As GMs and players, we all accumulate a set of techniques and tricks that we find useful from time to time. And we've got an experienced panel here who have some awesome tools, and I'm excited to bring them on. So first we have the tabletop player and GM who's prone to big enthusiasm, Alberto Muti. How are you doing, Alberto?
Fine, thank you, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Next, we have Kat Tobin, who's not busy producing. When she's not busy producing RPGs for Pelgrane Press, she runs LARPs and other story games. How are you, Kat?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And this next is a new GM of 2 years. Started with Apocalypse World Games, and all of her lessons are recent, so they're more valuable than my old.
Fresh in my head.
So they're fresh in her head. She's also a member of the Intercontinental Group of Awesome, which, if you're already subscribed to my YouTube channel, you've seen what an amazing RPG she is. Is Jules? Jules Ninneber. How are you doing, Jules?
Great, Rich. That was excellent name pronunciation right there.
Yes. Tabletop gaming advocate and designer of Sagas of the Icelanders, which is a fantastic game powered by the Apocalypse. It is Gregor. How are you, Gregor?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, we have a blogger from the Age of Ravens, as well as one of the main moderators of the podcast Play on Target, Lowell Francis. How are you, Lowell?
I am doing just fine.
Fantastic. Now, at the top, one last little thing, real quick. Is possibility there may be some excited and effusive people who may use adult language, so please be warned. Now we're going to jump into a number of questions that we have received from Google Plus as well as RPG Geek. However, as I said, if you want to answer or ask a question live, then we'll do our best to try to prioritize that and jump to that and answer it for you. So first, we'll talk about a question here from William Neighbors. What type of visual aids, if any, do you have ready when entering a game?
Well, I'll jump in. The one thing I've come to in recent years is because it's just so readily available. I do print out NPC pictures. I know there are card decks you could buy for Pathfinder and so on, but I will when I go to run a campaign, I'll go and track down as many things as I can on the internet or DeviantArt or whatever, and print a couple hundred pictures, and then I can randomly pull those out and throw them on the table. And that's probably really the only big visual aid. Anything else I'm sketching or drawing at the table itself. But that one allows me to add another dimension to the NPCs, and it's something that we weren't able to do, 10 years ago with any ease.
Yeah, I don't print anything out, but I sometimes just show my players pictures that I have on my tablet or my smartphone because I'm lazy.
Yep. No.
So, yeah, I've had players tell me that they don't like visual aids because it kind of detracts from their imagination, because it's a specific picture and they can't embellish it too much. But So when I show them something, I usually just say something like, here is something similar to what you're seeing. So they still have some space to imagine around it.
And to Coda, to go on to what Gregor said, there is actually a significant problem with representation in finding illustrations online. It's much more difficult to find persons of color, women of color, different, armor types and things like that. So that is a thing. If you're trying to do a more diverse game, that becomes a real problem.
I'm far too lazy to look any pictures up, but I do like bringing a map, which I did last time for Urban Shadows, and just to go like, well, show me on the map where you live, where is your hangout, and then people have something concrete to work with. And then we can see who gets in whose business.
Yeah, I agree with maps, Jules. I remember when you dropped out on that map, not only does this give you a sense of place, right, but it allows you to expand on it, like, oh, well, what's this little thing over here? And it's pretty delightful. Kat, did you have something to add?
I mean, NPC pictures are my biggest visual aid. I mean, I really like being able to see a picture of an NPC and then kind of connect that in my mind to a particular character. So that's something I'll always do for my games. Depending on the game, I might print out maps in advance, but usually what I'll do is I'll end up sketching the area, because I like, if I walk into a room, particularly if there's going to be a combat, I like to know where everyone is. I like to know what obstacles are in the room, and I'm really bad at visualizing that, so I'll always draw it out if I'm doing that kind of game.
I feel like I'm in the minority here because I don't use visual aids very much. I mean, I realized, I was talking with some other friends recently, and I realized that I approach games in a very non-visual way. For example, I have friends who consistently find pictures that will somehow represent their character. I don't really like to do it for my characters, and so I just probably have a slightly different approach. A list of stock images that one can pull out to get quick RPGs and still have some kind of quick NPCs, sorry, and still have some kind of characterization is actually something I've been thinking about recently for like demonstration game or something, and that I really like. And I have a friend who's an amazing GM, Rob Mulligan, and he used that with a great effect. So yeah, that I really like, but I've never done it myself. I've been certain thinking about it recently.
One other thing I like to bring to the table to help people is if there's any kind of bennies in the game or strings or things you need to keep track of. My group always just starts role-playing straight away and they forget all about them, so I love to take these huge glass beads in shiny colors that I can slide over to people, and then they might actually remember them in time. That works really well.
I just wanted to bring up minis real quick. I don't really do it that much, but minis can be a form of visual representation because usually they're used just like a tactical marker, to see where a position is on the battlefield. But I've seen that people use them like as a sort of portrait for their character. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to riff off something Lowell said, that there's a lack of representation, and in minis that's even worse, much worse. Like you can't even find a character that has a weapon that is not a sword, for example. So, I mean, going into, I don't know, female characters and so on, it's really terrible.
A couple other visual aids that I like are index cards. It's not exactly a visual aid, but throwing those things on the table for important locations and the like kind of helps fix it in the mind. Make it yep, there you go. And I would be remiss when talking about visual aids, since I do a lot of Hangout games, if I didn't talk about hats. There's just something special about wearing a hat for a character that I'm sure some other people like.
There truly is.
There is. Cool. Okay.
It sounds like a fantastic idea, and I will do it in the future.
More hats in role-playing.
There can never be too many. We need to have Hat the RPG. Hat the Hattening or something. I don't know. Richard Williams asks, how do you use background music and engage the other senses?
I'm going to jump in again. I do that really low level. I have different mixes on the laptop there, but I keep them very, very low unless I see somebody pause and I hear that the tune is particularly dramatic, and I can immediately crank it up to do that. But I've steered away from that because I've talked to a number of people for whom having that level of background noise actually creates anxiety or makes it more difficult for them to hear. So I've moved away from that in recent years, unless I want to create the anxiety, and then I'll use it.
I don't use it for a completely different reason. Well, I'm a bit of a novice GM, and one of the rules that I've read about and like is mostly stay in your comfort zone. Don't try to do funny voices if you're still trying to get your story under control. Don't try to come out with all the bells and whistles if you're still trying to run a really tight game. So if it would ever come naturally at a situation, I would do it, but otherwise I just far too focused on getting a really good tight story out there.
I think that's really good advice. I've only tended to use background music if it's actually part of the game, so to kind of make a statement. Like in one LARP that I was doing, it was set at sea, so I had a constant ocean sound of waves soundtrack in the background. But then 3/4 of the way through, there was a big storm, and the music kind of swelled appropriately. The music suddenly became a very stormy sea. So that was to kind of signify to the players what was going on in the environment, but not in an invasive way, but certainly in a way that they would notice when it changed, because it was quite a subtle kind of soundtrack all along. I sometimes use music as well to pace a game, to signify the start of a game or the end of a game, or to break apart scenes within a game. Like something that I've picked up from the Nordic tradition recently is using a theme tune. So having a theme tune for a particular game and then using that to introduce sessions or scenes, and also to close scenes. So it's like an oral prompt, basically, that something is changing within the game.
You're muted, Rich.
I was just saying, nice. I'm all about that. I have used music as the cue in for the BS stops and the game's going to start now, kind of an intro theme for the game. I think it's really helpful for people to kind of enter that shared imagined space, that feeling of, okay, the game's on, I'm playing the character. A lot of my games now are on Hangout, so playing music is problematic. That said, I do have 8 gigabytes worth of video game music, which I've found is great because there are no lyrics. It's made to where it can repeat often. Usually it's very good at being innocuous. You know, it's the kind of stuff that you listen to while you're dungeon crawling in a particular game, or it's very thematic, but they're often really short and punchy as well. So I think, Kat, you have some really great ideas on use of music. Any other feedback on background music or engaging the other senses, which I think we've left untouched?
That's true.
I think the only well, this works both for music and for other senses. The only time I've tried to put more was, for example, when I played McGay Baker's 1001 Nights. She does the book itself advises to like try and get theme appropriate food in the environment and share it with the other players, and that I think is a fantastic idea. And if you have a game that has a very coherent and strong aesthetic, as 1001 Nights does, it can work very well. And I have played it sharing baklava with friends, and it was very nice.
See, I would call that sharing baklava with friends, and a game happens because baklava is that important.
Yeah. I was thinking. Yeah. I mean, baklava makes everything nice, so you know.
On the other senses thing, something else that I've done is messing around with the lighting in the room. So I have in the past, in my kind of more goth days, or my more goth GM days, used candlelight I just love the ambience of Candlelight. It's simultaneously warm but also kind of creepy. And as well as that, I've also used like periods of darkness, or I'll dim the lights if it's quite an intense. If I have the facility to do that, I'll dim the lights in the venue to create that kind of creepier, everyone getting closer together kind of atmosphere.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything of value to add. I was also going to bring up 1001 Nights as a game that explicitly tells you to use other senses, like also colors and materials, for example. But yeah, I used to use music a lot in the early days of my gaming. But now I use it less and less because I also found it like either too intrusive or as part of like planning for a game. If you hear a song and you think, oh, I want to use this song in a scene, but then you get to the game and that scene never happens, and you know, it's like the classical GM preparation problem. So yeah, I agree that all the senses can be and maybe should be engaged for a better experience, but in a very non-intrusive way, just to set the mood, the ambience.
Any tool that you end up fumbling with at the table is a bigger cost than the reward that you're getting for that.
Yeah, definitely.
If I have to pause the game to find the right song on the playlist, then I'm
Not
already taking away from the game. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gregor, the music for during prep is a great idea. I think that's really excellent. And I want to throw in one other thing. I have a couple of Pandora stations that I've kind of curated to be exactly the mood that I want for particular games. And when I write for play-by-post games, I mean, that's just, I can key in to that mood very easily by having that music ongoing. And the last thing, I have to brag for a second, but there's a custom move that I once created for Apocalypse World using the lyrics of a particular song. It was kind of awesome. So that's it. Just pat myself on the back. Okay. It's on the Powered by the Apocalypse forum or the Google Plus community if you're interested. All right, so let's move on. Richard Williams had another question. What techniques do you use to keep everyone around the table engaged in the game when their characters aren't in the scene, especially if they haven't been in action for a while?
Okay, again, I'm going to go first. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Because I've thought about this a lot, because I do think balance and kind of making sure the pacing and the sharing of attention at the table is probably, for me, the single most important thing, and I may be wrong on that. But I think that the important thing is, before you get to that point, you've established the trust with the players that they know that, despite this being someone's scene, they're going to get their time at the table. That you're good about establishing that balance of time. That you as a GM are paying attention to how much time someone's taking up, and that you'll move on to the other people. And you have to build that contract up as a technique, especially early on. In the first couple of sessions you're playing with a new group, make sure that if somebody seems like they're going on, you go, okay, I'm going to hold on to that, let's move on to the next person. And because people have played with other groups and they might not have a GM who's paid attention to that or has built that contract, you need to model that behavior early on, and then when you get to the later sessions and later scenes, people will be more willing to buy in and give that trust to you.
Yeah, I also think it's really, really important that you pay attention. Like, if the players are not in the scene, or I mean, their characters are not in the scene, or the players have not been engaged, what I usually do is just find an appropriate moment where I can pause the action with the other players, and they then cut the scene to somebody else. Like, I'm engaged with someone, and then they're about to sneak into a castle, and okay, you need to, I don't know, defy danger or make a dexterity check. Then I tell them to, like, hold the dice. We'll see what happens later, and then cut to somebody else. Okay, what are you doing? but at the same time, I would be kind of wary about this because I like just a generic type of advice in the sense of keep everybody engaged can be a bit overwhelming sometimes for some people. I've seen players that are perfectly happy to just hang around the table and not engage particularly. Like, also if you're hosting a party and somebody is just introverted, sitting on the couch there, enjoying their drink, you won't just barge in, grab them, and drag them on the dance floor and tell them, "Come on, let's dance." You need to take it easy. You need to leave people their space if they require it, of course. If you see that somebody wants to contribute something but isn't getting their space, you obviously need to give them their cue, their spotlight. But otherwise, be considerate about what the players are actually feeling around the table, I suppose.
I want to cut in on what you said about cutting the scenes from one group to the other, one player to the other. I like to do that too, and sort of very aggressively, so go back and forth, and not just in a die roll, but also just ask one player a really hard question, or put them in a really hard spot, and then instantly move. So to hopefully sort of make the player realize that he has to be thinking about what he's going to do or say, because I can cut back to him at any moment. So he has to stay engaged. He can't just zone out there. And if at all possible, it's not always the case, I like to juxtapose the different cutscenes that are happening so that they sort of become cooler together. One group might be negotiating for the survival of their stronghold, while the other group might be fighting for it. And if I can sort of mix those cutscenes together, cut those scenes together so that they sort of enhance each other, then I hope everyone will become more engaged because of it.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome thing to do, because it really does keep everyone's attention fully on the game, even if they're not actually actively in the scene at that moment. Something else that I've done as well in the past is I've asked players who aren't involved in a current scene to play NPCs in the scene, especially if one person goes off by themselves. I'll use them to play NPCs in the scene that everyone else is in, just again so that they're still engaged, they feel like they have something to do, and they're involved in it.
Yeah, I really... Sorry, please.
No, go ahead, please.
I really like the idea of having different scenes that are actually thematically linked, and the whole jumping back and forth quite aggressively is a thing that I try to do, but I'm not doing nearly enough recently. Mm-hmm. One thing that I've used, especially in some games that allow a certain level of collaboration, and games that welcome, for example, questions and the whole ask provocative questions, build on the answers guessed, is to create an environment in which and sort of start it as a practice at the table, to have all the players be thinking and asking questions and making proposals, of course trying to keep things non-obtrusive, but even when they're not in scene, so that they're sort of still thinking about what could happen, and there's that, oh cool, I like that, or what about this? And I think it was I don't know if it's in the original, because I have it in the Italian translation, in Joshua Newman's Shock. He referred to this, and the game also had mechanics to do this and change dice rolls from the public as throwing popcorns from the audience. And I sort of really like the idea, in a way, the image it creates.
From a GM perspective, I agree that kind of collaboration, asking questions, I'll even kind of default to non-active players, like, you know what, I think that Joey's not going to like that. What do you think? And I'm advocating for what I think an NPC's agenda might be, but I'll tap the person who hasn't been involved in the scene for a little bit, kind of draw them in that way and let them be part of the world without having to step into a whole nother character, because some people don't always want to necessarily switch. They kind of want to jump in behind the eyes of their guy or their girl and kind of stick to that. as a player, because I think we're all talking about a lot of great GM techniques, but as a player, one of the things that I found really useful in Hangout gaming, this first started in Monster Hearts, was that I would use the chat window within the Hangout game to do text messages to other non-active players within a scene. And it was great because it would allow the MC to either have something going on the site, queue up the next scene. Oh, I know Dakota's going to be going over here, and it was also a great way to, as Jules was talking about, juxtapose, because we would have this side conversation. It was completely innocuous at the same time that someone was having to face down a werewolf, and it was really pretty hilarious.
Downside to that is that it can really distract your GM.
That's the
Rich.
GM's fault, though. Really, the GM's fault. Usually my fault. Cool.
Yeah, I mostly play by Hangouts these days, and the chat window has been used a lot for either for these some small in character comments or just for commenting the scene, but like, oh wow, that's a strong move. Oh, I hate you, things like that. And usually when I'm in the scene, I have to completely close the chat because that gets really distracting. And as a GM, sometimes I keep it closed because of that. But yeah, it helps because in a way, if the other players have a space in which they can comment what's going on without being disruptive, it helps them stay engaged, I guess.
There's also games that are so dramatic that it's actually nice to disengage a little bit between your scenes, so you actually can sort of recharge before your next really hard scene. So kind of a cool story that I had with Lady Blackbird is that someone brought up Sky Pirate cards. They were collecting little Sky Pirate collectible cards, and I gave them these index cards, and I just told people, okay, make your card. So, they were not in the scene. They were actively working on drawing their character and giving their character little card stats, and it kept them, relaxed, but they were still working on making a cooler game. So I like that.
See, I'd suck at art. I would have all the stick figure dudes. I have to say this. I know it's one game and one game only, but Primetime Adventures and Fan Mail is one of the greatest ways to keep non-active players engaged because they get to reward good play within the active scene. It's really awesome. I'm going to move to one of our live questions from Dave Bernazzani, who is an excellent trivia player.
But not the most excellent.
Not the most excellent.
Yeah, well, he's excellent though. Anyone still using a GM screen these days?
For Kagamatsu, I actually got one especially to play Kagamatsu, which is a game where, as the GM you play the samurai and all your actions are hidden because you're keeping your players a little bit in the dark about what's happening.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if the game specifically requires something hidden from the players, then yeah, I would have a small screen or something, but otherwise, I started rolling all my dice in the open a few years ago, all the time, and also my, all the charts, random tables, lists, everything that I have are just laid out in front of me on paper, so...
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
far
it's,
enough away. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the screen can create a certain mystique about the GM, which might be useful in some games. But otherwise, if you don't have it, you appear much more open and comforting to the players. I think it's much more honest and friendly.
Yeah,
I found myself not using the charts, and that it was blocking my line of sight to the table more than it was anything else. And that's why I took it down. I can see why people do it, especially if they have games where they need that for reference, but I just don't usually play those games.
Kat, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, I've never actually used one. If I do have to roll, the majority of the games that I run tend to have a much more transparent system. And the GM is very much expected to be working with the players to create a great story as opposed to working against the players in the way that maybe they traditionally did. So if I did have to roll a dice in secret, I would just do it behind a notebook or my tablet or whatever. So.
Alberto, GM screen?
I was trying to think like if games have played in the past couple of years if there's been any GM screen, but yeah, Kagematsu is the only game that comes to mind, and of course I was on the player side but no, I don't think GM screen.
I play most of the time when I'm running games. I don't have to roll dice anymore, so
Oh yeah, that's true.
it kind of takes away the necessity for GM screen. I have found though GM screens are really good. If you spill your drink, it keeps it from going too far on the table. So that's useful, Dave.
I'm not sure that's what they're for, but that is a
That's very
use
useful.
of them, I think.
A good buddy of mine, Troy, asks, sometimes one or more loud and enthusiastic players take the majority of the spotlight, even when you try to keep moving the narrative around equally. What techniques do you use when those players are drowning out the others? And is there any difference when it's the men at your table drowning out the women? Lowell can't go first, so it's from the rest of you guys.
Something that I'll often do is, and I actually picked this up from another GM, is if I feel that somebody is not getting their share of the spotlight, I'll work in elements from their backstory, so that the plot is more tailored to their character. Basically, it uses elements that they've already established that they're comfortable with and that they're interested in. So that I found helps to get them more engaged in the plot and gives them a bit more confidence to be more active.
That's excellent advice, I think.
Yeah.
I had to think if I ever had like a player who completely dominated the game, and I can't remember any cases like that. But when I see that like someone is pushed to the sidelines or something, I usually just kind of pause the conversation, turn to them, ask them what they think, show them that I am, or supposedly we are interested, although I cannot speak for the other players. But yeah, that's very good advice. That you just kind of twist the story and the world towards that specific player, that specific character.
Yeah, I'll usually, if I notice that something like that has happened, that some character hasn't been under the spotlight for a while, I'll usually often frame a scene on them, maybe in which they're alone or just another character, to just give them the opportunity and to shine and do their thing. And yeah, it's really a bit unsubtle, but it sort of works, I guess.
I would say that in my case, where I've had players who will get their question, answer whatever, and then kind of push forward or dominate at the table, I've tried to be more explicit about the meta, in the sense of going, okay, well, I think we got your scene, I'm going to move on to Bob, and be really kind of explicit about that. This is the process that's going on at the table. You've gotten your fair share. I'm going to move to here, and that's usually worked. I did have a case where I was playing at a game where one player, it was split 50-50 male-female, and literally whenever a woman spoke, it didn't register with him, and he would interrupt them and speak over them and so on, and it took me a while to realize that was going on, and the other players, the women players at the table, they didn't feel comfortable saying anything, and so we did have to kind of stop, and I said, I want you to recognize your behavior, what's going on here. And that was very weird, but it was a conversation that we had to have, and it was hard. But sometimes you've got to recognize that there's some odd social dynamics, especially gendered ones, at the table, and sometimes you have to address that in a non-confrontational way. But I think sometimes as a GM you go, okay, well, I'll just work it out in techniques and things and in play. Some things have to be spoken about in terms of what's going on at the table, and that can be a pain.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that completely. I think it's very important if you have, particularly if it's a gendered issue. I think it's very important to talk to the player or the players involved, and just not necessarily in front of everyone. You can maybe take them aside and say, look, I've noticed this is happening. let's think of a way that we can make this better for the other people. So yeah, I think it's communication is key to resolving most of the social issues I think that happen in games.
Absolutely.
I have a different variant on that. On the loud player, I run games for a lot of GMs, and because I'm a novice GM, I've actually had players like not just collaboratively, but like tell me what should happen now, or tell me that I should really wrap the scene up or something, and while they're players in my game. And they're not being dominant, they're really trying to be helpful, which is a very strange situation to be in. In which case, I usually kindly thank them and then do what I was going to do anyway.
So you're saying I should shut up? Is that what you're saying, Julie? Okay, I'll do
Talk to your players!
Talk to people. It's all about talking.
Yeah, I think at that point it goes beyond just role-playing game techniques or GM techniques. It becomes a social issue. I mean, it's somebody is that disruptive or that inconsiderate, especially, as we said, in a gender conversation, then you need to just... This is a thing that's outside the game. You need to talk to the person. There's no, you don't give them minus experience points or whatever. You need to engage the person.
Minus life XP.
I'll just say this: if you've got it at your table where there is a guy over talking the women at your table, he should probably go. Like, I'm not saying that's the first thing you do, but I'm saying that that's a cue to their personality type, and if they're not responsive to feedback, you got to make a choice. You're better going with the person who works within the group rather than somebody who's kind of asserts themselves over other people consistently, regardless of feedback.
And I agree with that.
All right, let's move on. We've got a question from Nick Golding. This is from the Q&A. He's asked this just a moment ago. Most games need a good deal of improvisation, particularly from the game master. Do you use any tools or techniques to help you improvise stuff more seamlessly? Real quick, as you guys are thinking of an answer, Nick, there is a panel that's coming up in, doing math, 13 hours, so that's 8 p.m. Eastern, that is purely about this. But these folks, these wonderful experts, aren't on that panel, so now you're going to get a double dip. But if you want to know about off-the-panel GMing, I'll be moderating that panel at 8 p.m. Eastern today. But now we'll pose this question to these fine folks. Any tools or techniques for improvisation?
God almighty. So I just finished reading Unframed a couple months ago from Gnome Stew, and there's some great essays in there. And the one thing that I took away from that is Vincent Baker's article. He mentions when you go to present an NPC or describe a scene or set something up that you always include one contradictory detail. That an NPC, a grizzled old character and things like that, but his teeth are perfect. Or the room is horribly dusty and filled with mildew and decay, but there's one spot that's cleared and cleaned. And I thought this was, that's a dumb little thing, Once I used it at the table, it increased player attention. They focused on the details. They found interesting stuff with that. The characters kicked up for them. It's so simple. It's so fun, and the payoff for that little technique that you learn is huge. So if you want a little thing that you can practice and do very easily at the table, I would say that's great. And I consider myself a pretty savvy improv GM, but just that little thing really, really helped.
I like using, Rich already pointed it out, I already like using the index cards. If anyone brings up something in the game, especially in a game like Lady Blackbird, write it on an index card. Kale is looking for his long-lost sister, index card in the middle of the table. It helps the players to know, that these things will be elements of the story, but when I have to quickly think of a new element or something that will come up, I can just go with what's already there in the middle of the table and go like, oh yes, your sister may have been here or something, and just make the story tighter and work with what people have already thought up.
Yeah, reincorporating stuff that came up previously is usually it works very well in my experience, and we did it a lot. I haven't played Siren in a while now, but it used to be my go-to game for like GMing a one-shot. And if you start, I mean, and every time you have to answer a question about the character's past, technically you have this big blank page, but every time the game ran very well, and I sort of noticed and started doing it purposefully, of course. It's when you take stuff that came in other questions, in other answers, in other flashbacks, other details, and sort of start weaving it together. And it saves you time and energy, because of course you can grab something that's already there instead of pulling out something completely new out of your head, and it makes the story tighter, as Julie said.
Yeah, something that I'll do quite often is particularly if I brought a map with me of an area, I'll use details or elements from the map to introduce new elements into the story. If I have to improvise for NPCs or something like that, something that I find very useful is I'll think of a character in a film that they're like, and that helps me to create a really coherent NPC. So every time they meet that NPC, they're not acting in a different way. I know exactly how they'll sound. I know how they'll speak. I know how they'll react to different approaches, whether, how they'll react if they're intimidated, how they'll react if they're kind of seduced, how they'll react in all of those circumstances. And it just gives me a really clear idea in my head of what that NPC is like.
I haven't read Unframed yet, but I was going to bring up this book. I think it's Flipped.
Oh, the Johnstone book?
Yeah, Keith Johnstone Impro.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not so much in terms of actual techniques that you can use, but just reading between the lines and so on, the general idea of the book, I really learned how not to block. And I think that's one of the keystones of Impro. That's when somebody else contributes something, when a player says something, you don't say no, but you say yes and yes but and so on. This can be applied to so many things, and it just keeps the game going. The game never grinds down to a halt because of somebody else's input. Reincorporation is super important. Also, when you introduce something new, writing it down, for example, on an index card, like Julia said, putting it on the table, it somehow makes it more real, and it keeps coming back. And lists and random tables. Because improvisation, in some way, is not just coming up with something new, but building upon something. Mm-hmm. And I think we all have our weak spots. I'm terrible with names. Every time I come up with a new NPC on the spot, I'm just like, oh, what's your name? Bob. And it sounds terrible. So one of the things that I should be doing far more often, I don't do it enough, is just have a list of names in front of you. Because once you come up with a random NPC on the spot, when you just make him up, you have a list of names that you can attach to the character. Or just a list of random details, a list of random buildings, places, everything that you can just kind of sneak into the game and then expand in the context of what's happening. If I may just keep rambling a bit longer, the really old D&D stuff with all the random encounters where the characters are traveling through wilderness, and then you roll on the random table and then encounter 4 orcs. And lots of people just discarded that and stopped using random encounters because, it's just 4 orcs, what the hell. But the thing that those tables are actually really good at is when the characters are traveling, through the Elfwood, and you roll 4 orcs. And you suddenly have to think about it. You have to improvise. Like, what the hell are 4 orcs doing in the middle of the Elfwood? What, it actually gives you a lot of jumping off points for further improvisation and introducing complications and so on. So yeah.
And of course, you don't. Oh, sorry. You don't always have to improvise all by yourself. You can also turn it back to the players, which is very nice to do, especially if you're drawing a blank and just go like, "Well, you know this NPC. How do you know them? Tell me about them. What's their name?" And that relieves a lot of the effort for you. I once had a game where they stumbled upon a big bad corporation that they were actually in their arch nemesis, and I didn't have a name for them, and they were like, "What is this company called?" And I was like, "What do you guys think it should be called?" And they came up with this really awesome name, and they were that much more engaged into fighting it.
There's another technique that comes from public speaking, where when you're doing a Q&A session for people, you should and they ask you a question, you're not sure about it, you should repeat the question back to them. I modify that. So one of the things I try and do is, if my gears are grinding, when a player goes to do something, I slow it down and say, okay, well, what does it look like when you do that? Or, how are you dressed? Or those kinds of questions that give players a chance to add their own personal details. Also use that as a chance to go, okay, I need to think of what's going on next. It gives the player something, and it's kind of a cheat, especially if you're feeling overwhelmed. That's a great way to catch your breath, is to pitch those kinds of questions to the players, to give them a chance to showcase themselves.
Before we move too far on, I have to jump off of Gregor's Wandering Monster thing. I was playing this is way long ago. This is 2nd edition D&D when it was newish. But my buddy and I were playing at high school, and it was just a solo game. And he rolled random encounters. And he was like, oh, okay, it's hobgoblins. And then we go on a little bit, and then I'm back in the woods. And he rolls, it's hobgoblins again. 3 times in a row, he randomly rolled for hobgoblins. Guess what? There was a hobgoblin invasion, people. We didn't even know we stumbled into it. One thing I got to throw in for off-the-cuff GMing, based off what Jules said, the Mountain Witch trick. I love the Mountain Witch trick, because it's off-the-cuff GMing that you don't have to do. Mountain Witch trick is where you throw kind of a really pregnant situation in the past, and it can be teased out. There are a lot of different ways to do it, but you turn around and you see the portrait of someone you never expected to see. Who is it? Bam! The player needs to kind of step up, and there'll be that, oh crap! I have to think of a thing. But give them that moment, and there's some brilliance that happens. It's really, really fantastic. I have so much fun with the Mountain Witch trick. It's so easy for me. Just write it down what they say, because you can reincorporate it later. It's awesome.
Lazy GM's #1 trick: ask them what they want to see. But I mean, this is something that's baked into Siren again, because I keep bringing it up because reincorporation is so central to this game, and I've noticed after a couple rolls, every player I've played with, and I used it as a demo game, so I played it with a lot of different people. Every player I played it suddenly realized after a couple of rolls that having other players, the rest of the group, answer your questions, give you flashback, build out your character for you, was much funnier than doing it yourself. And this is impressive because of how consistent it has been. I have yet to meet a player who would, by the end of the game, prefer to answer their own questions.
Very
and it's
cool.
sort of that kind of space, I think, is a bit where the magic happens, when the shared imaginary space becomes really real and really open to everyone.
Not everybody is comfortable with answering questions and being put on the spot like that. When you just ask them, you see someone from your past, who is it? But in general, I think that is in fact the biggest and best tool. The biggest tools are the other players.
Yeah. I've got a couple questions here from the wonderful Paul Edson. So one is, what techniques and tools do you use as a GM to keep yourself engaged and having fun? Not Lowell.
Okay, I'm gonna jump on that.
I was jumped on that too because I was like, well, I'm playing the game. That's how I have fun.
Yeah.
But the one thing that can happen in games that I don't enjoy and that actually disengages me as a GM is when players start. Well, they want to go into a fight or something, and one of the players says, "Oh, we can't just go in unprepared. We need to plan this stuff." And then they start going over all these planning minutiae that could take hours, and they start going over all these trivial details that I would just like to skip because I want to see them right confronting, the king or the big boss right away, and they just keep going. And if I let that happen, that really disengages me as a GM, and most of my players sometimes do it even though they also just want to get to that big finish. So how to deal with that? I usually just throw stuff at them, but then you get this story of of something spiraling out of control where players don't have a lot of control over what they're doing. If they're actually enjoying planning this heist for 3 hours, I'm a bit lost. Last time what I tried to do was take something from, I think, Trail of Cthulhu, preparedness, where I said, okay, you guys are going to do this really big heist. I'm going to start you right in the middle of it. So, you'll touch the ground and go. But I know you guys are like master strategists, so you all get 3 points where you can say, oh, I've totally planned for this eventuality. I've already prepared this and this and this, and I will totally allow that.
That's
And
really cool.
really got me over my disengagement.
And I have had tables where we get into that running around and stuff. One of the things that I do with that, especially when players are enjoying themselves at that, is I will make sure that I am actively engaged in what's going on, because what often happens is you see them go in circles and they're kind of not listening to one another. And so I actively intervene at that point, and I'll say, okay, so what I'm hearing is you're talking about these two options. Or it seems to me like you have a question about this. Let me fill this in. And kind of doing kind of a manager point for that in terms of their planning session, not offering ideas but trying to organize it for them. And I find that when I do that, it cuts the time that they're spending on it down by at least half, because they are hearing a voice of authority, and someone is organizing stuff. And because everybody wants their plan to go across, now they've got somebody who is kind of offering them that this is what is being said at the table. And I'll also strategically edit out things to keep them focused on what is going on. So there is a little bit of a cheat there. And again, it depends on the game.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that you need to be a little bit selfish in a way, because you do need to run a game that you like, a system that you're comfortable with, introduce fiction and characters that you like. Just do what you love. If you like a specific genre, try to run the genre. If you're a big horror fan but don't like fantasy, don't run a fantasy game. That's the thing. There was something else, but I lost my train of thought.
Yeah, I think definitely running what you know and love is certainly for me is the key way of staying engaged. In that I only run games that either I've written myself, which I hope that are interesting to me, or games that I'm really, really interested in running. So there's always that baseline level of engagement. And then, yeah, I like cutting back to something that Julia said earlier. Cutting seems quite hard particularly if players are getting kind of bogged down in as Julia mentioned, minutiae that they don't need to do. Just kind of going, right, let's leave that there and let's just go to it. I mean, it's not. You have to protect your own enjoyment as well as providing an enjoyable experience for them, because if you're disengaged, that's going to infect the whole game.
I have a question. Is it if you write your own game and then you end up playing it a lot, is it hard not to disengage from your own game at some point if you're running like the 100th game of that thing?
I'm going to say yes. Well, it can be. I mean, every group is different. Every player is different. Every group is different. Every run of a game is different. But there is a bit where you get a lot of the same things kind of happening again, and that can be difficult to. It can get repetitive, and you can be like, oh look, oh gosh, you're doing that again. Shock! Who saw that coming? Oh wait, I did. Something that I've done is I'll try and kind of change things subtly within it. Like I'll almost use it as an experimental base and kind of go, well, if I tell you this, or if I describe this scene in this way, does that make you do something different, or does it produce the same results? And it's almost like kind of playtesting, like creating a feedback loop. So
interesting.
Cool.
Alberto, how do you keep yourself engaged? Any techniques you have?
Well, I guess, I mean, as Gregor said, the key is probably, it's if I'm playing a game, it's because it's a game I'm interested in. We're bringing up themes and issues and a kind of fiction I'm interested in, and usually, I mean, fortunately, in this moment, I have quite a wide pool of players I pick from, because there's this big group of indie gamers in Italy who mostly only play through Hangouts because we're very dispersed geographically. So so this will be also with players who usually give creative contributions I'm really excited about. So fortunately that's not too difficult, but yeah, in a way sometimes, I mean, I also have, as a GM, I also have the tools to cut to the action, to cut something that I think it's bogging people down, as Julia said. And actually the idea of the preparedness points is really cool, and at the moment I'm GMing Apocalypse World, and I don't see a situation happening in which I can use that, and it's a pity because I want to use it now. It's a really cool trick. Mm-hmm. But yeah, generally it's more an issue of setup and of creating a situation that I know will have me engaged. Otherwise,
sorry. I was just gonna say, The Regiment by Paul Riddle and John Harper, which is also an Apocalypse World hack, has an explicit procedure when the players are all, because it's a military game, when the players are all bogged down in planning their next strategic move, their next military action, it has a little nice procedure which kind of speeds things up. I haven't tried it in action yet, but it came to mind.
Interesting.
If somebody plans that hard, I just let them have it and move on. Like, they care a lot more about this thing than I do. I'm much more interested in the fallout from it, so I'll pretty much just color past it. You got your thing. Good job. You spent half an hour of the game. Let's move on. I don't do it like that's what's going on in my brain. I don't do it like that's not the color how I do it, but that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think there are two reasons why people do that. Either because they're terrified of something bad happening to their character, or because they really enjoy doing it. If they really enjoy doing it, just let them do it. But if they're doing it because they're just, they're trying to cover every base so that nothing will go wrong, then I think preparedness is a really great way of going, you'll be all right. It's all right, love. It's fine. Nothing's going to happen. Calm down.
Yeah, I think that, especially, I mean, I've mostly met this in some more traditional games, but there is an element of gaming culture in which, like, oh, you can't not do it.
Yeah.
And I've been in situations, and I've seen other players do, like, in which you're going through it and trying to plan for every possible situation and every possible dick move the GM might throw at you, because that's the framework and that's how you do it, and it's a huge waste of time in a way, of everyone's time. But on the other hand, there can be also interesting engaged planning, but that can also maybe be made more interesting if the GM cooperates, giving them materials. Okay, you want to plan. What about I get you a map and you look at the map, and if you can do it, of course, like maybe even just it could be possible on the spot, like just maybe Googling something. But it could work, I guess.
if I see something like that happening in a game, like it's getting bogged down by all this preparation and carefulness and stuff, I try to go a little beyond my usual authority and so on, or and give the players more info or just more to work with, even something they might not actually know in the game as far as we've played. But I will tell them like, okay, I'm gonna tell you that the Duke actually doesn't have pet crocodiles or something like that, you know, just to reassure them and speak
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And something like Fate allows you to mechanize planning, that you can break it down and say, okay, well, what are the aspects you're going to do? It's another version of preparedness. What are you going to set up during this planning thing, and make it clear that it is mechanized, it is discrete, it is short. We're going to do that, and then we're going to move on.
We're going to talk about specific games, Wilderness of Mirrors. If you've got a group who really wants to plan, throw Wilderness of Mirrors at them. It's specifically the players come up with the plan, and then you, as a GM, have some mechanics to mess it up based on the details and problems. It's a really fantastic little game from John Wick. Totally check it out. Oh, I could talk to these folks forever, but I've only asked for an hour of their time, so we're going to go with one last question. I know I want to go longer too, but some people, they're up till 1 a.m. like Gregor, and I know that Lowell's only going on 3 hours sleep, so here we go. Todd Zurcher asks.
1 p.m.
1 p.m. Oh,
Yeah,
well,
it's midday.
fine. We can just go for another half hour. No. Todd Zurcher asks, we all have tried and true toys in our toolbox. What's the new and shiny thing that you've recently learned or added?
Can I? I'm gonna jump in. Just to save Lowell going first. I went to a kind of a GMing seminar panel at PAX Prime recently, and one of my big takeaways from that, which I thought was a really great idea, was it's quite a simple thing as well. It's just if you're playing the kind of game where people have to roll dice to achieve something or not, if somebody fails their roll, let them narrate how they fail. And it's a really great way of kind of reducing the level of the failure to something that the player themselves is comfortable with, but it also keeps them engaged with the game and keeps them engaged with the failure, and potentially brings in some new and interesting narrative stuff that you can then reincorporate later. So that's going to be one of my new tricks the next time I run something.
That's cool. Also, I know players by which they would give me failures much harder than I would ever think.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you let the players screw themselves over, they will screw themselves over much harder than you would do.
Yeah.
Otherwise.
It's true. Yeah.
One thing I've been doing a lot recently, it's not exactly new, but if we encounter a situation that's not really covered by the rules and so on, I mean, you could make a custom move if you're playing an Apocalypse World game or something like that, but I simply assign 2 or 3 different results to a die and roll it. Maybe ask the players for some input, like, what do you think the chances of this happening? And then we see what happens.
I've got 2 things. One is that I just started playing a little bit of the Apocalypse World, and that system of investigations or so on, where you roll and then the players get to ask questions. I've lifted for other non-Apocalypse World games. I think it's a better way to handle investigations. The other thing is, and this comes, I was at Gen Con at Games on Demand, and John Stavropoulos, who I'm just horribly mispronouncing his last name, has the X card, which I know a lot of people have used. It was the first time that I had used the X card, the system for allowing players, a very stark visual representation of when they have problematic materials at the table. I was honestly very skeptical about it, and I used it at those games, and I've used it now a couple of times online. one of the things that it does, the sort of side effect of using it to make sure that people can comment or get around material that they find problematic or that they have objection to. You know, they're spider phobic, and I've brought spiders into the game, which is a real problem that I had at the table. Other thing it does is when you put that out there at the beginning is you develop a level of trust. The players see that you are open and willing to listen to their issues, and in the space of time that you have at a tight demo or one shot, I saw it click for a lot of people, and I think it built up a level of trust and comfort in an easy way that I hadn't expected, and that had a huge payoff. So that's a simple little trick, especially at demos and so on. If you're, it's not just a whatever PC thing. It is a good technique for establishing trust.
Actually, and just tagging on to that, something that I've come across recently in a game called When the Dark Is Gone by Becky Annison is it develops that X-card technique, and at the start you get all of the players to write down on a piece of paper just themes or elements that they don't want in the game. So like in your example, they might not want spiders in the game. Equally, some people don't like other themes, or they might have particular triggers. So you get everyone to write that down on a piece of paper. They all give it to you. You then write up a list. You add in a lot of your own. So, you know, a lot of kind of, maybe if somebody hasn't put spiders, you might put down spiders, just so that there is none of that element of guessing who's put down what thing. You know, you add a lot of stuff to the list, and then you put the list on the table, and you just kind of say, these are the things we're not going to have in the game. And you make everyone aware up front of what elements you're not going to be bringing in. And I think that's a really good way of creating a space, you know, creating buy-in to that, protecting everyone from playing through things that they have issues with, space. And also it kind of, it helps you delineate your world as well. It's kind of, you know, where you have a better idea of where the players want the story to go and where they don't want it to go.
And for convention games where you're going and you're sitting with a GM and you don't know what they're like, they might be that guy or awful. Yeah. It is a way to delineate and show people exactly who you are as a GM.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah.
I don't use the X card because I mostly play with people that I know, and so we kind of know each other and what we like and don't like. But I was just going to say that one of the strengths of the X card, compared to what you described, Kat, is that the player doesn't have to specify what it is that bothers them, because some people might be uncomfortable actually saying what's
absolutely
wrong.
I think the two techniques work very well together, actually. I would kind of use both, so that you have the ability to say up front, but you have the anonymity as well, because some players might not feel comfortable with stopping the game, or with kind of saying something is causing me a problem now. So, you know, this allows people to just prevent it from getting to that situation, I think. So yeah, but I think definitely both of them they complement each other very, very well. So.
This is especially important for. Yeah, just want to say that it's especially important for convention play where you're playing with strangers and don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
I never use an X card. Instead, I just neurotically worry about freaking out my players. Slightly less frequent. I don't really have something new and shiny. I've learned recently just something old and polished that just never gets old and always amazes me how good it is, which is love letters. Love letters are Apocalypse World custom moves that you can give to your players if they do something. What's especially cool about them is that you can use them at the end of a session. People are usually want to do stuff like I researched this and this, or I go stock up my workshop or something, and that's something that they're very interested in but won't have a lot of narrative potential. And with a love letter, you can give that to them between sessions and really sharpen the situation So it has a very high risk potential cost and also a very high payoff. And if done well, they'll be really excited about starting the game because their opening move, their love letter, will be coming up. And you have an instant liftoff because either something, well, no, actually always something interesting will happen. I love them.
Oh, do we have a... Oh, go ahead, Alberto, please.
Well, I was thinking of two things. One that I've started doing a lot more recently, and it's even though it's spelled very clearly in Apocalypse World, but I've GM'd in the past as well, but I hadn't used it as much, is to lay down a couple for NPCs, and this ties into what Kat said earlier about thinking maybe of an equivalent for a movie character or something to keep your NPCs consistent. It's to lay down a couple of principles, a couple of ideas, a couple of concepts, like what they're like, what they follow, and keep them constantly in mind when you're playing that NPC. Like I have an NPC and there's a control freak, and we are playing in an apocalypse where things are very strange. There's a strong psychic supernatural element, and he's not like that. He doesn't have a contact to that, but he's very attracted to people who do. He wants them around himself. In a community in which often people like that are a bit shunned, so that created a lot of loaded situations, and we built on it. And now recently we've discovered what happened in his past that made him like this, and it's worked out very well. While the best new shiny thing I've ever discovered, even though I've been using it for a while now, is I sort of learned it through the way, again, Siren is the most tools I've developed were for playing with people I don't know, because you need to have something to fall back on, where you're playing with friends or people you know very well. It's easier, and I got it through the way Siren is written and through a game of 1001 Night I had with Megai Baker at an Italian convention a couple of years ago, which was absolutely stunning, and it's not about the game at all, and it's just about framing things from the start in a very welcoming way, asking questions, expressing interest and engagement in what the players come with very explicitly. Oh, I like that. Oh, that's a cool idea. So how does that work? Can you give me some more examples? And I feel that in some situation it's more about creating an ambience in which everybody feels engaged and gets some of this enthusiasm from you than about what you do in the game itself. It's a bit of a meta technique, but I really like to do it, and I think it works great.
That's neat. That's really neat. All right. Well, I think we could probably talk for hours, but we have filled up the panel to capacity with excellent advice from our many panelists here. And thank you for your questions, everyone. Panelists, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Really have enjoyed this hour plus, so thanks so much. Again, VirtuaCon will be going on for the rest of Saturday the 11th and also tomorrow, Sunday the 12th. Please do check out rpggeek.com to find out more information. Thanks to all of you, and hope you have a good rest of your day.
And thanks to you, Rich.
Thanks.
Thank you.